Olly, so lots of debate around the reopening of schools in South Africa and the UK. How's it looking there?
Yeah, absolutely. Experts are really divided on this. There are some who say it's too early for schools to be back, that it's too risky to children, to teachers, but also crucially to the wider economy with the outbreak where it is in the UK at the moment. But we have had today the scientific advice to the government published, and what that says is that while there is not ever going to be a case while there is an epidemic going on that you can say there is no risk from sending schools back in a phased way, it does say that the risk, if you send schools back in a phased basis, can be kept low, and also that the guidelines that are going to be in place, with classes being kept in bubbles and not allowed to mix at break times, things like that, that you can make sure that the risk is as low as possible. And this scientific advice that's been published today also says that in the view of the scientists that have contributed to it and are advising the government, they don't believe that teachers will be at any raised risk compared to other key workers who are currently going to work in the British economy, like people who collect the bins, people who work in supermarkets, postmen and women, and employees and workers like that. So, as I say, the scientific community split on this one, but the scientists advising the government believe that a phased return in June is possible in a safe way.
Yeah, now we haven't reopened our borders just yet, but the UK is set to announce a 2-week quarantine for international arrivals. How's that going to work?
We are not entirely sure just yet. The British borders have effectively been open throughout the coronavirus crisis, and that's led to some criticism for the government, although the scientists have said that when you have a large epidemic, then, you know, a few hundred or a few thousand passengers returning to their home country or even coming from abroad is not going to make a huge amount of difference to that epidemic. They now say that as the outbreak starts to come under control in Britain, it is the time, according to the government, to impose a 2-week quarantine on anyone coming into the United Kingdom, be they Brits returning or people from abroad coming to the UK. We don't know exactly when it's going to start. We think in June. We don't know how long that is going to last, that regime being in place. It's going to be reviewed every 3 weeks. What will happen is that anyone who does come back to the UK will have to go to a specific address. They'll have to give that address to the border officers as they arrive, and the police will be able to check up on them and make sure they are sticking to quarantine for 14 days in that location. Very hard to enforce, though. It raises the prospect as well of as the UK being able to get to this in a more granular way going forward. So in a month or 2 or 3 months' time, if the UK's outbreak remains under control, it may be able to start looking at individual countries where the outbreak continues to grow and say we will not accept travellers from those places without them going into quarantine, but other people can come from other parts of the world. But the airlines and the tourism industry here in the UK is furious that the government is even bringing this in.
And let's talk about borrowing money. We've seen countries around the world having to do this. The UK government, of course, borrowing soared to its highest monthly figure on record last month. What are the implications?
Yeah, £62 billion in the month of April. As you say, the highest number on record. That's 1.3 trillion rand. Eye-watering sums for the UK. That borrowing is largely going to things like the job retention scheme, the furlough scheme here in the UK, in which the government is paying the wages effectively of 8 or so million people who've been furloughed by their employers. Government loans, support for local authorities, things like that. Now, with interest rates so low at the moment, the UK government is able to borrow very easily and very cheaply on international markets. So I think there is a feeling at the Bank of England, but also at the Treasury in London, that sums like this aren't too much to be worried about yet, as long as they don't go on too long. So a lot will depend on the UK economic recovery. If it's rapid, then these sums, I think, will be reasonably easily dealt with by the UK in terms of the national debt. If the UK economy takes a long time to recover and these numbers like this continue to stack up, that begins to get very, very difficult indeed very quickly.
Yeah. So, Olly, just very quickly, just tell us what the infection rate is looking like in the UK. What are your numbers standing at?
Yeah, well, we're getting around 2,000 new cases a day in the UK, which sounds like a lot, but is way, way down from the peak here in Britain. We've also had a couple of days this week when, according to the figures, we've had no cases and no deaths in London, which was previously very much the centre of the outbreak in the UK. The number of deaths each day is falling too, still at high numbers, over 36,000 in total, according to government figures. But certainly the outbreak continues to move in the right direction.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Olly Barratt is live in London.